Hi guys, how are you all today morning? Good morning. Today is 30th August 2023. My name is T.S.V. Raghavan and I live in Chennai, Tamil Nadu, India. This is my spiritual vlog on YouTube. Hardan, 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 Haribol, TRSV, Nectar, NECTAR, Nectar. In this particular vlog, in all my previous videos, we have been discussing about the knowledge and information that we have gleaned through the study of spiritual books, scriptures, contemplation on the material universe, and meditation on the spiritual universe. This particular video in this vlog is no exception to that rule. In fact, it is a mere continuation of all that we have been doing in my previous videos and those that we will do in my future videos. So kindly subscribe to this vlog and press the bell icon so that I may keep reminding you of all my future videos and my past videos. So let us continue with the topic of discussion for today's video. For the past few videos, we have been talking, analyzing, analyzing and discussing about a term called focus that plays a very important role in the evolvement, psyche, destiny and karma of a human living entity. In that process, we have also discussed about several case histories, both material as well as spiritual, that authenticated this importance of the term called focus in the psyche of a human living entity. Today we shall discuss another case history to prove this point. But before doing so, let me remind you that I shall take both the case history as well as the analysis of the term hand in hand so that the viewer will be able to understand this term far better than if he had done so when both were separated and they could not be connected. In other words, if I had first talked about the case history and then the theory, or vice versa, it could be slightly complex for the viewer to understand what I mean to say. I have begun connecting both together so that they get intertwined and are able to present the theory better than they did before. So now let us talk about the case history. There was one family with the surname Ghosh which lived in Calcutta, now Kolkata, the capital of West Bengal in India. This family was decent, educated, and pious. The matriarch of this Ghosh family was an ardent devotee of Lord Shiva. She spent most of her free time praying to God or Lord Shiva or in worshipping Lord Shiva. This pious, devout lady once prayed to Lord Shiva to have a son that could make her proud. Lord Shiva probably put this particular pious lady on an exalted pedestal, as a result of which he blessed her with one bony boy who was born on January 1861. This boy was christened Narendra. Thus, Narendranath Ghosh became the complete name of this boy. This lady was very happy that Lord Shiva had listened to her fervent prayers and blessed her with a son. This boy, right from his childhood, was quite energetic, restless, and extremely mischievous. This guy gave this pious lady, such ample trouble during his childhood that one day the same exasperated lady wailed, I had prayed to Lord Shiva for a son, but instead, as a boon, he sent one of his own Rudras to represent my son as a representative of Lord Shiva. Rudras are a class of devotees of Lord Shiva who are known for their habit of throwing tantrums, getting violent, getting into fights, getting very angry, or wailing and crying for attention or some other subject. Rudras are known for their red complexion and their violent and energetic, hyperactive nature. This lady wailed that her son Narendranath Ghosh reminded her of such a Rudra, a devotee of Lord Shiva. Now, let us take a detour from this case history and come to the theory. To know the theory or to understand it, we will have to have a basic recap of that theory. In this world, in the spiritual side, there is one spiritual whole from which advertently or inadvertently some spirit sparks get ejected. Just like fire sparks get ejected from a huge fireplace, similarly, spirit sparks get ejected from the spiritual whole. In the case of fire sparks, they sooner or later get extinguished by the air in the space, and so they lose their identity. However, the spirit sparks that get ejected out of the spirit hole do not lose their identity. Just like fire sparks are nothing qualitatively except fire itself, similarly, spirit sparks are nothing else other than spirit itself. According to our ancient scriptures, spirit is actually the superior energy of Lord or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead has two types of energies. One, the superior one, is called the spiritual energy, and the second, the inferior one, is known as material energy. These spirit sparks, though they have got ejected from the spiritual whole, do not forget this fact. Once they get ejected, they start floating in the space aimlessly and endlessly. They do not have any purpose in mind at that time. They are just completely free spirit sparks. However, the memory of their being the superior energy keeps embedded in their memory. Now, because of this, one day these spirit sparks, individual spirit sparks, while floating in the space, by chance or by default or by design or deliberately, come across the huge material universe or energy. When they do so, they are reminded of their being their superior energy and this material universe being the inferior energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We must all remember that both the superior energy and the inferior energy are possessed or owned lock, stock, and barrel by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They may be free otherwise, but they are under the control and regulation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. These spirit sparks conveniently forget this fact. More so, they are also not able to comprehend that though they are qualitatively better than the material energy, quantitatively they are, as individual spirit sparks, minuscule compared to the huge collective material energy. When this happens, these spirit sparks, in their overconfidence, complacence, and their desire to lord it over the material nature, try to come nearer this material universe. Once they do that, sooner or later they get connected to this material world. When they get connected to this material world, they become spirit souls, raw, unevolved spirit souls from spiritual spark that they were initially. Now, when they get in touch with the material world, become spirit souls. When this attraction or connection happens, it may be some achievement of that spirit spark turned spirit soul, but this material world gets visibly irritated. This is just like a shellfish which belongs to the amphibian species of living entity and which resides in the bottom of the ocean or floats in deep waters of the ocean. This shellfish, which is actually a living entity, is divided into two equal parts. These two equal parts are placed one above the other to make this shellfish. This shellfish, when it gets hungry, opens both parts wide so that it may attract food particles inside that wide open mouth. The inner core of that two parts of the shellfish is layered with the shellfish's flesh and saliva and the enzymes that digest the food particles which fall into the open mouth of the shellfish. Similarly, the material world has its mouth wide open and spirit souls get attracted to that wide open mouth and fall into it. The shellfish has the habit of digesting these food items that have fallen into the wide open mouth. However, sometimes some foreign particles like sand, particles of dust or stone or some other thing also fall advertently or inadvertently into the open mouth of the shellfish. When this happens, and when the shellfish finds that it is not food item, then what it does is that it begins to wrap this foreign particle with its own saliva, layer after layer, completely, so that this particular foreign particle gets cocooned and entrapped into those layers of saliva. This is because the shellfish does not have the capacity to eject this foreign particle out of its own wide open mouth. Similarly, this material world is not able to eject this spirit soul which has got in touch with that wide open mouth of the material world. Instead, what it does is just like that shellfish, it wraps this spirit soul with four layers of material body. These four layers are known as the first layer being the causal body of intelligence and logic, the second body of astral mind, feelings and emotions, the third body of etheric senses being sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch, and the fourth gross body made up of four material elements, namely air, fire, water, and earth. Thus, this spirit soul gets haplessly cocooned into these four layers of the material body. As soon as this happens, the same spirit soul sheds its original identity and becomes a living entity instead. A living entity is a spirit soul cocooned with four layers of material body. Living entities may start with being just one cell, then graduate to becoming amoebas, algae, weeds, grass, creepers, plants, trees, worms, insects, reptiles, amphibians, birds, bees, beasts, and finally human beings. This happens when this newly born living entity gets into an orbit of repeated births and deaths. This starts happening immediately after, and so this living entity begins to pass through various incarnations of birth and death in this material world. This goes on till it reaches the process or the stage of being born as a human being. Before that, the same living entity has just its own memory of experiences in those births as insects, bees, trees, worms, creepers, etc. But as soon as it reaches the human birth, destiny or karma begins in its psyche. What is destiny or karma? Destiny or karma is the result of actions of that particular living entity in human form. According to our scriptures, there are at least 400,000 species of human forms alone. In other words, there are at least 400 types, 400,000 types of humans in this material world. They begin with the basest and most boorish human form and reach the demigod or celestial being status in the human form. Now, when the person gets into a human form, his or her destiny or karma begins. This destiny or karma is worked out in that particular lifetime itself where it got originated. However, this does not happen often. A residue of unworked work in progress karma remains when a person in a human birth passes on. This residue of karma is kept as a deposit in a particular file or one archive called Sanchit Karma. This Sanchit Karma is the storage of unworked karma of a particular birth of a living entity. It is kept in the superconscious memory of that living entity. When this particular living entity takes another birth, that another birth is based on the storage of Sanchit Karma of the previous birth. That means that the foundation for the next birth is based on this Sanchit Karma of that living entity. Now, this does not happen in just two births. There may be several millions and millions of births of a particular living entity in which in each birth there is some residue of unworked karma that has come from the other previous births also. When it happens, this storage of Sanchit karma grows on and on depending upon the size of karma or destiny that has not been unworked by this particular living entity. As for example, if a particular living entity has taken, say, 10 births, Sanchit karma of 10 births will be kept in storage in that particular psyche of that living entity. Psyche means superconscious memory. The basis for the 11th birth will be the storage of this Sanchit karma in the sense that a slice of this Sanchit karma is taken by that living entity to be made as the foundation for his or her 11th or next birth. This slice of Sanchit karma is known as prarabdha karma. The basis for the next birth becomes this prarabdha karma. Now we will see why there is a difference between the nature and psyche of various living entities. Every individual living entity was initially a spirit spark that got ejected out of the spirit hole. Then it got in touch with the material world and became a spirit soul. It got ejected from the spirit hole. Now, after it got in touch with the material world, it became a spirit soul, and when this spirit soul was entrapped in a cocoon of four layers of material body, it became a living entity. All of us in this material world who are going through this endless grind of birth and death are individual living entities. So, what theory I am explaining here is equally applicable to all of us. And depending upon our own karma and destiny and unworked sanchit karma, our life keeps changing. So, in a particular time or generation in lifetime in the material world, there are 100% human living entities besides the other living entities. Of these 100% who have had their own prarabdha karma as a foundation for their birth in a lifetime, 75% are commoners who have a mundane existence. They keep floating in this material world like zombies in a trance, doing the Rip Van Winkle act. They are totally ignorant or in the process of getting evolved. They simply vegetate through their lifetime in a particular birth. This happens to 75% of living entities. Only 25% beg to be different. These 25% were also initially like the other 75, but advertently or inadvertently they got evolved enough to come to the elitist bracket of 25%. Of these 25%, 20% are still in the material side of the material world. Only 5% are spiritually inclined. However, in the subconscious memory of every living entity of these 25% living entities, there is a memory or a thought that they are not just living entities but actually spirit souls. When this memory of being a spirit soul gets embedded firmly into the psyche of that particular living entity and it starts remembering it, then it also remember that as the superior spiritual energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, its true identity is to be an eternal, totally surrendered servant of God. When this happens, gradually that living entity tries to beg and pray for some assignment to be completed by him to the satisfaction of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. In that case, depending upon the evolvement of that living entity, God may give him or her some material or spiritual assignment. Here I would like or hasten to add that God Himself is complete in Himself. These assignments He is giving only to these living entities so that they may get evolved themselves. The ultimate aim is that every living entity should realize its true identity as a spirit soul, get liberated from this chain of repeated births and deaths, and finally get delivered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This must be the principle or aim of every living entity in a society at a particular time. Now, of these assignments, as I mentioned, 20% are material. We have already discussed case histories of those who had this material assignment. However, there are 5% who get spiritual assignments depending upon their own evolvement. Our case study Narendranath Ghosh luckily, fortunately belonged to this 5% elite category. This he did not know initially. Now, what happens is that when one particular living entity gets spiritual and manages to get a spiritual assignment, he or she has to begin with scratch. This is like one person joining an organization as an intern. Similarly, when a person gets a spiritual or material assignment, he or she has to start from the beginning A alphabet of the 26 alphabets of English. Slowly but steadily, he or she goes up the rungs of ladder of that particular assignment, just like an intern becoming a trainee, then a clerk, an employee, a supervisor, a low level manager, a middle level manager, a high level manager, and ultimately a CEO or a managing director. In the same way, when a living entity gets one assignment, which in this case is spiritual, then that person slowly climbs up the ladder of that assignment. Assignments, whether material or spiritual, are actually the direct representatives of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the life of that living entity. He or she is supposed to worship this assignment in the same way that he worships the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He or she should totally and unconditionally surrender himself or herself to that assignment to complete it to the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. This does not happen overnight. It happens in a slow process in one birth or in several births. Same happened to Mr. Narendranath Ghosh. He received some spiritual assignment long back in some other birth, and now he had reached the level of being born in a very pious family as Narendranath Ghosh. He already had a lot of work in progress in store from that particular assignment. Assignments are just like money and genius. They are extremely jealous mistresses. They will not brook any sort of opposition or distraction from the living entity who they have come to. They want complete 100% loyalty and obedience from that living entity when he or she has them as his or her assignment. This is true in the case of every living entity. This person should be so unconditionally involved, involved with that assignment that slowly and steadily it grows into the psyche of the living entity and becomes a part and parcel of his own living psyche, his or her own psyche. It becomes an extension of that person. In such a case, 25 out of 24 hours in a day, 7 days a week, this particular living entity thinks and acts only according to that assignment. The same happened to Swami or Narendranath Ghosh. This Narendranath Ghosh had to go through several ups and downs during his birth as Narendranath Ghosh. This is just like they say God takes some people into deep waters not to drown them but to clean them. Swami Narendranath Ghosh had to go through several failures and frustrations both educationally and professionally before he came to the level of understanding that he had come here for a more exalted spiritual purpose. As soon as he realized this, help came from everywhere unexpectedly and from most unexpected sources. He got very good spiritual friends and companions, plus those who wanted to finance his mission to achieve that spiritual assignment and to the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When this happened, the same Narendranath Ghosh became hailed, being hailed as Swami Vivekananda, initially locally, then nationally, and ultimately internationally. A person who was made fun of for his looks, intelligence, and knowledge was so brilliant and who proved to be so extremely intelligent and brilliant that today there are several educational institutions in India on which are being run in his own name. There are Swami Vivekananda educational centers, universities, schools, colleges, etc., especially in the south of India. Swami Vivekananda, who was initially Narendranath Ghosh, became an international celebrity at a very young age of around 32. This man was so great that he achieved all those stages of success in spiritualism that people who fail to achieve in a lifetime stretching to more than 70 or 80 years. Swami Vivekananda was only 39 when he passed on in 1901 or 2, but is hailed as a genius, an exalted icon, and a legend all over the world, and as an exalted spiritual figure. He achieved more than what others, both the 75% living entities and the 25% living entity, could ever imagine to achieve. In 39 years of his short life, he became a person to be emulated by everyone who wants to reach that stage of perfection. And this was all because of the same term focus that he used to the extreme perfection in his own lifetime. He focused on his assignment of spirituality and knowledge completely and to the satisfaction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We all must take a leaf out of the life of Swami Vivekananda, who was initially Narendranath Ghosh. We must unabashedly emulate Swami Vivekananda so that we may also reach his exalted position one day or the other. That must be our ultimate aim in life. That is all I wanted to talk in this particular video. Kindly let me know what you think of my talk on this particular matter. Please give me your own expert opinions, thoughts, ideas, and views so that I may blend everything together for the sake of this society. Before concluding, let me remind you that I am also a published author with Amazon Kindle and paperback. I write on spiritualism, fiction, and assorted subjects. Spiritualism happens to be my favorite subject. Till we meet in my next video, it is good morning from TSV Raghavan.